A very warm welcome and good evening to this Founding Fuel Masterclass. My name is Indrajit Gupta. I'm a co-founder at Founding Fuel. This is a conversation that we've been planning for a while because we felt that there was need for a closure on this whole issue of corporate reputation and what it takes to manage corporate reputation in this digital and AI-driven kind of world. It was, of course, as you would have guessed, sparked off with all that happened around the saga with L&T and its chairman. But we thought today we'd try and kind of zoom out of that and try and make sense of how the landscape around corporate reputations shifting. What are the factors that we need to take on board, and also why we might start looking at a new playbook for managing corporate reputation. We've got a very, very interesting audience, very diverse, from different industries, different roles, many CXOs, chief communication officers, from media, some folks from the NGO space as well, foundations, heads of foundations. And most importantly, we've got three very stellar folks on our panel today. And I'm not going to get into detailed introductions today because we've, in the run-up to the masterclass, into the Founding Fuel, given you a good taste of who they are, what they're thinking, what's on their mind. And I'm presuming that on the chat box, you'll see many of the links that are available to the conversations we had with them and shared with all of you. This is meant to be a relaxed conversation. So without much ado, I will introduce you to Sabia Schwarzer, who's joining us from New York. Hi, Sabia.
Good morning.
Morning. Sabia, of course, it's early morning for you, I know. Thank you so much for making time. I've known Sabia since 1996, I think, if I'm not
Please
mistaken.
Don't say that. It makes me feel very old.
No. Brilliant communications chief and a general management perspective to the whole space. And wonderful to have you. Aditya Ghosh, again, needs no introduction. Most of you have known him since the Indigo days. Now, of course, he's switched allegiance to Akasa Air and he runs many other ventures, including one which he himself anchors, Homage. And he's on the board of quite a few companies, Greencell being one of them, and Oyo Rooms being the other. So wonderful to have you, Aditya. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And
I can see DC from who's the MD of Greencell. He's I can see a few other friends.
Yes, we are in very familiar things.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Looking forward to this.
Terrific to have all of you. And of course, finally, Vijay Bhat again needs no introduction to the Founding Fuel community. Just simply superb quality of mind. He's of course now a leadership coach. In his old avatar, he was the strategy director for Ogilvy, based in Singapore, and has essayed many roles around the world for Ogilvy. But lovely to have you, and thank you so much for agreeing to anchor this conversation. This chat, Vijay will lay out the broad contours of it, so I won't get into the detail. He's already spelt it out in some of the mails that may have come to you before this. So without much ado, over to you, Vijay, and we're looking forward to a stimulating session.
Thank you, IG, and welcome to Sabia and to Aditya, the panelists. Welcome to all the attendees of this interesting conversation. Like Aditya, I recognize a few faces and names, and it's good to have some familiar people in the session. We have just about an hour, a little less than an hour now. So I'd like to dive straight into it. You have read the detailed introduction of Sabia and Aditya before, so I'm not going to repeat that. But what I want to say about both of them, when I read their profiles and what really struck me, starting with Sabia, is she talks about being a global citizen from childhood. And I know how being a global citizen from childhood really impacts your worldview. I've not been a global citizen from my childhood. I became a global citizen much later in my career. But our children have been global citizens from childhood. So I have a sense of what that means and what that involves. Sabia also talks about her motto, which I loved, which says, keep moving forward while extending a helping hand to others. I like the dynamism of that. And I also like the approach that she's taking of taking people along with her. So Sabia, on that note, a warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much. It's an honor.
Aditya has talked about serving three bosses: investors, customers, and colleagues. And I like that perspective a lot, especially because he talks about spending 70% of his time on the people side of things. And that is something that I think connects all three of us in this conversation today. He also talks about honest and direct communication in tough times, which I think is quite central to the topic that we are discussing today. And I'm sure we will delve into that a little bit. So warm welcome to you, Aditya. Looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you very much.
I thought about looking at 4 core themes today for this discussion. And just a quick one line for each one of them. The first one is really the shifting sands of public perception. Warren Buffett famously said that it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 seconds to ruin it. I'm paraphrasing him. And we are certainly living in that kind of a world today. And so we will spend about 10 minutes on this topic. The second topic is how to build trust and authenticity in a digital world, where on one hand, we are trying to curate our personas, curate our reputation. And on the other hand, we are also talking about being authentic, especially when things go wrong. So how do we find the right balance between those two? The third focus area is what happens in a crisis and how do we respond when crisis occurs. And both Sabia and Aditya, Sabia from her experience with highly regulated industries, and Aditya from his experience in not only highly regulated industries, but industries which are reputation hotspots, aviation, hospitality, etc. So I think we will spend about 7 minutes or so in that. And the last one, if we have the time, is really about how to take internal stakeholders along. Reputation is not just an external facing issue. It's perhaps more importantly, an internal facing issue. And that's the fourth area that we would like to discuss. I want to make sure that the audience is not just a listening audience. It's a very accomplished, very experienced audience. So I would love to get in the audience questions, comments as we go. My request is to please type in your questions and comments into the chat box rather than to call them out live. That will enable my colleague Charles to look at them at the back end and compile some of the key themes. And we'll bring them out and I will offer them to the panelists for their comments intermittently through the session. So audience, please do put in your comments. They are most valuable and most appreciated. So with that said, let me move to the first topic, which is that, we all know that in today's digital world, these digital platforms can build and destroy reputation. One, because of the speed of transmission. And second, because unlike in the old days, unlike in my time, for example, controlling the narrative is harder and harder and harder. So there is both speed and scope, which is becoming a big challenge. So the question that arises in my mind is that in this kind of a situation, is it even possible to think about proactive management? Or are we forever going to be in a reactive mode? And with that in mind, Aditya said something very powerful in his profile. He said, it's important to distinguish noise from signal. That really struck a chord with me. And so, Aditya, my question to you is, from your experience in aviation and hospitality, which are sectors that are always in the hot spot, how do you distinguish noise from signal? What are the ways in which you say, this is noise, this is signal? Let me focus on the signal.
Yeah. So what I meant by that is, Vijay, that most of my life I've spent in highly consumer-facing businesses. Lots of people involved, literally hundreds of thousands of customers every day. But, along with that also came tens of thousands of colleagues also. So now what happens is that, at least in my experience, and may or may not resonate with others, is that before a crisis sort of bubbles up all the way to the CEO and it really risks the reputation of the business, there are early warning signals that the customers start sending out. They're unhappy with this, or they want a slightly different, approach to something, or they don't understand why you're doing something. Similarly, your business partners, external stakeholders, whether they be policymakers, whether they be regulators, or for that matter, vendors, partners that you work with. Now, the only way to proactively kind of start looking at distinguishing the noise from the news or the signal from the news noise is that you start talking and listening very carefully to all those frontline colleagues of yours, who are interfacing with the external world much more than you do. So and that becomes, I don't know whether foolishly or just a statement of fact, I've never done a customer survey in my life. I've never done a customer survey in my life. But I've done hundreds and hundreds of employee surveys, and I've done hundreds and thousands of interactions with colleagues. Right? So that then kind of begins to give you some sense of patterns, right? Let's think about, not just an image or a reputational crisis. Let's talk about a competitive crisis, right? That you are fast becoming irrelevant in the life of the consumer, and there is another competitor of yours who's racing ahead. Now, before it comes to you, chances are that your feet on the street are beginning to see your competition already working actively and, walking the same streets as you, being able to close deals better than you, and so on and so forth. So rather than just, stepping back and being in the boardroom and looking at statistic on a graph, if you kind of say, hey, there is something going on here. And I need to talk to my business development manager. I need to talk to my sales team. I need to talk to my bus conductor or my flight attendant to understand what is it that's happening. Why is it that we are beginning to lose our footing here? And Clayton Christensen, the famous Clayton Christensen, he said, right? I mean, the disruptor, the innovator comes from the bottom, right? And kind of eats away. So I think that's what I kind of generally meant from at least a formula to look at something proactively.
That's a lovely comment. Thank you, Aditya. I'm reminded of one of David Ogilvy's famous quotes, where he said that we would prefer that our leaders have big ears rather than big mouths.
Yeah, I mean, those guys
right? And I think what you're talking about is cultivating those big ears and listening very intently to what your own people are telling you, which sometimes leaders don't pay that much attention to. Thank you so much.
I just want to comment on that.
Please go ahead, Sabia.
Because I think I see this a lot, in large corporations, we will pay agencies to do focus groups and things like that to find out where the company is reputationally. But the an easy and low-hanging fruit is actually to ask the frontline employees. So I really, Aditya, appreciate the point that you've made. It's a low-hanging fruit, and it makes employees also feel relevant to the strategy and the outcomes that you are pursuing. It's an important point that must not be missed in reputation building. So I very much appreciate what you said.
And
so could you, Sabia, could you then, from your experience with financial services, your experience with pharma, etc., any examples or any instances that come to mind where either good listening has played a part or poor listening has played a part in this whole area?
You know, I think customer complaints, just like Aditya was saying, are a big, it's the bread and butter of any industry. And now it's become so much easier to complain in a more public forum. The key to managing that is really being very fast and engaging on a personal level. You know, these days, a lot of bots are involved, and most people can tell if it's standardized answers, and that frustrates them if they're really, you know, grieved about something. So I think having a warm body respond and then very quickly take the conversation offline, you know, offer a email, a phone number, whatever to call to have a conversation, take it offline. That really helps to de-escalate. The other very practical thing is, in the age of misinformation and really a criminal activity on many of those sites, it's extremely important to know practically who are the people to call on these at Facebook, at LinkedIn, at Instagram, you know, who can shut off things and control it. It's very important to know who are the officials in your city, in your municipality, who are involved in cybercrime, for example. And I'll give you a case at Allianz. We had a very dramatic case. It didn't spread a lot because we were fast. But there was an accusation by a woman saying that someone in Allianz distribution is actually high up, is a pedophile, because that person is sending inappropriate pictures of himself to her young daughter.
Wow.
And, you know, that's pretty dramatic. So I think the first step is to take a deep breath, and these days to really think, not go down a rabbit hole, but to really think, what's the evidence, what is happening? And in that case, you know, this is somebody's personal reputation. It's extremely important to know who to call and what happened. Long story short, I mean, we did call the Munich police. The Munich police, you know, that time I was based in Germany as a cybercrime unit. And it turned out that this was a Nigerian ring behind these kind of personal attacks, trying to get companies to pay them off. And, you know, this woman was asking that Allianz pay for, you know, mental health treatment for her daughter, things like that. So, you know, just extort money from corporations. And this is something where you have to act extremely fast, because some pictures that are manipulated or created, which, you know, can be done these days, and it's very hard to distinguish the fake from the real, you know, these need to be taken off the net ASAP. So I think in very practical terms for communication professionals, you need to know who to call, who to work together with, so you get to the bottom of the issue, and you know, make sure that the damage doesn't spread further. So, you know, it's very hard to be on the active side of these things, because this was a crazy case. I mean, we didn't, you know, where's this coming from?
I think the important point. Yeah, go ahead, Aditya.
I want to offer you know, on a follow-up from what I said and what Sabia agreed to. I want to offer a warning and a suggestion. The warning is that you cannot turn this into by the by, you know, rumor mill, you know, and, you know, anybody can say anything and it all comes up to the boss's ear, because that can be very, very dangerous. Huh? If my employees, my colleagues think that just because I have my big ears, I'm going to just listen to everything and start believing in it, right? It can lead to a lot of misinformation, cooler talk, rumor mongering, and gossiping. So what's the answer to that? The answer to that is that especially in the sizes of businesses that we are talking about, whether it's a pan-nation business or a global business, all of this listening can be systemized, right? Where everyone is treated the same way, everyone has the same opportunity to speak up. I hate and I do not take any credence to anonymous emails, for instance. I just don't. I mean, I'm just telling you personally. I had to spend many years to convince my colleagues that you write to me from your official email ID. I am giving you my word and I'm putting my reputation on the line that you will not be treated unfairly and you'll be protected. But anonymous can be anybody, right? I can pretend to be your subordinate, but actually I'm sitting in a competitor's office shooting off emails to you.
Yeah.
So I'm a big one, especially when it comes to large scale businesses, on creating systems, in creating processes which are not bureaucratic, but which treat everybody justly. So I just wanted to offer that.
Beautiful. I think what both of you are saying makes so much sense is that on one hand, we need the speed and scale of systems to be working for us. But both of you are also saying that unless there is a good human to human connect, Sabia, you mentioned it that, you have to take it offline. You have to engage with the person. You need to know whom to call. And it's only through those human to human connects that some corrective action can be taken. So it seems like it's a matter of balancing both. One more quick question on this topic before we move on. One of the things that we are noticing is that there seems to be a generational gap or even a chasm between CEOs and CXOs and boards on one hand, and employees and consumers on the other hand, who are younger, who are digital natives, who operate in a certain way. So the question is, what do CEOs and boards and CXOs not quite understand about today's world and today's audiences who are so much more digital? Where does this gap really come from? I'll ask Sabia to start and then Aditya to jump in.
I think there's a fundamental sentence that everyone needs to let sink in, and that is today's reputation and brands are co-created by customers and employees, full stop. And it is not like 20, 30 years ago when as a company you could decide what you want to be, even if it's aspirationally, and put it out there, even shout as loud as you can with many dollars behind it and hope that it lands. Your reputation has never been your own. It is what others think about you. But in this day and age, you have to think about it as co-creating it with your employees and your customers. So I think one of the key things is to be listening to what they're saying. And in your mind, let go of the big word that is the C word, word control. We are having circular conversations in which we're trying to have a discourse, maybe trying to understand genuinely where the other party stands. Unfortunately, not just in politics, but everywhere else, we have actually unlearned how to relate to each other in a very practical human to human way because of social media, because we go into our echo chambers and, and it's very simple. If you want to relate to each other, you start by listening, and you are not sending a message. There's no hierarchy of messages. My message is not more important than yours. It's a circular one, and you learn from it. So you're listening and you are learning instead of, because you have a different opinion, I must shut you down because my opinion is superior. And I think this is what you see play out a lot in conflicts, or even just in, people are just moving away from each other. Let's put it that way. It doesn't even have to be an active conflict. But an active conflict would be actually great because you're engaging with the other person's opinion earnestly. But I think that's a huge, bigger conversation in society. How do we actually, as communicators, get the dialogue back and the circular conversations that are necessary, because all sides learn from it. That is gone. It's always me trying to convince you that I have the superior opinion.
I love the idea of the circular conversation and co-creating the brand. Aditya, your additions to that?
So let me first answer the question that you raised in terms of what creates this chasm.
Yeah.
I think when two people are talking, two groups are talking, especially both groups and especially the leadership, right, are not talking and listening in the language and the mode and the tonality in which the information is coming, right?
Yeah.
So people are telling us things, but we are saying, no. I want you to fill this pulse survey. I want you to send me this email. I will have a once a quarter skip level meeting with you. And I want you to tell me then, don't tell me now, right? And even if you're telling me now, I'm not being able to assimilate this information, right? So the language, the media, the medium of it, and the tonality of it, we need to understand. But you know what I find somewhat frustrating, amusing, surprising is companies do that with customers. You know, when we're talking to a customer in Delhi versus a customer in Chennai versus a customer in New York City, good companies, good brands, at least will kind of, take care of that nuance, differences or sometimes stark differences. But when it comes to your own colleagues and employees, we don't do that, and we don't take care of the generational gap that there is, so that's the answer to why the chasm is. But the second bit is, and just to take on what's from where Sabia left off, it's also important to understand that we can put out a message box. We can tell people who we are, and the more clear we are about it, there are chances that you're beginning to influence the narrative positively. You cannot take control of the narrative because, like Sabia put it really well, especially today, there are your customers are co-creating the brand. In fact, companies want that. We want user-generated content, right? Because it's just cheaper as well, right? So we want that, but we are like, no. We want you to tell me, give me the content that I'm asking you to give me.
Yeah.
That's kind of funny, right? So I think that humility that has to come in to say, you know what, let me listen. Let me tell you who I am. Let me tell you what I'm trying to do, So I found that extremely useful when let me put it this way. A very simple one, which I think most of the Indians in the room will remember. Way before, no one before Indigo asked customers to collect trash, right? We went out there and we told our customers, you're paying us to fly us, but please help us collect trash now, right? But we also said why. And we told every colleague why and how it helps to keep the aircraft clean and reduce turn time. And the next time you'll fly, it'll be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And now the whole world helps you collect trash. You don't go to a restaurant and help them collect trash, right? But so there is a way to nudge that behavior if you are able to explain more clearly who you are. And so therefore, whether it is listening in and being open to the way people are communicating to you and being clearer about who you are and what you're trying to do and why you exist, I think that is something that will help bridge the gap.
Lovely. I'm reminded again of another quote from my advertising days by the famous Jeremy Bullmore of JWT. He said that consumers build brands, and here I'm going to change the word brands to reputations.
Yeah.
Consumers build reputations the way birds build nests, from the scraps and straws they chance upon.
How interesting. That's beautifully said.
And therefore, what it means to us is that we have got to be mindfully placing those scraps and straws, but recognize that it's the consumers or the audiences who are ultimately going to build the brand nest. and then we work together with that. Beautiful. Thank you both for your answers and your inputs and your insights on this first topic. I just want to give the audience an opportunity, maybe 30 seconds or so, to reflect on what you've heard. And if there are any questions or comments, please put them into the text box. Meanwhile, I'm just going to look at my notes so that we can move into the next part of the conversation, which is about building trust and authenticity. This one's for Aditya. Aditya, you said in your spotlight answers, authenticity is non-negotiable. And Sabia, you said you don't communicate authenticity, you show it through your actions. And I think these are two really lovely nuances about both authenticity and that authenticity translating into trust. So, Sabia, the first question is for you. In this world of curated online personas, through influencers, through our own messaging, through all the stuff that we do, how can organizations avoid being perceived as performative, or simply using badges, or simply using these signposts rather than really revealing who we truly are? What can we be doing in this process?
I think that's a very good question, and it really depends on what organization you are, but it starts with courage. And what that means is that you actually put the difficult questions surrounding your organization that you haven't solved and that you are grappling with out there. So I think you build authenticity not by first of all, by your actions, firstly and foremostly, but when you are communicating, you build that when you say, here are the things that we have not yet solved and that we would like to solve. And here's the tension that exists between our customers and us, for example. Most companies are unwilling to go there because just like on Instagram or elsewhere, we see perfect lives of people, and we all know that's not true. What we see in the corporate world is perfect corporations with happy employees, happy customers, everything is going well. And of course, people inside the organization know, and customers know, that that's not entirely true. Having said that, no person and no corporation is entirely good or entirely bad. There's nuances to it. But you create connection when you name a issue or a problem that's out there that you're trying to solve. I think it would show a lot of self-confidence as a person and also as a corporation if you name the topic that you are grappling with and you haven't solved. And I'll go to the recent example that Indrajit shared with me of the return to office policy. By the way, it's in the US, it's a conversation too. This is a very small example, but why not put out what the issue is? What is it that you're worried about as a CEO? You can say, guys, I'm worried about the competition in countries like China and elsewhere, where people are working to death. Now, I don't want that, but I see that we need to up our productivity. This is the problem. You are not saying I have a solution, because then people will, back to the circular conversation, people will disagree with you maybe, or, say you're old school or whatnot. I think it's about owning the tension and the unsolved problem and speaking it out and having people participate in it versus I've got this figured out and I'm going to whip everybody into shape to be there. I think that's how you in communication create authenticity. And most companies are not ready to put it out there and say, here's an issue. We want to make money. We've also promised this. We want to be good stewards of our resources, but here's areas that are not working so well for us. And we are thinking of solutions. You would be surprised how many of your stakeholders would come to your help, maybe.
Yeah. One of the recent researches that I read from the public relations firm Edelman talked about declining trust in business. And I'm curious, Aditya, to hear your views on, from an Indian perspective, where do you think trust in business is going, and what does authenticity of leaders and leadership have to do with that?
So I believe that great brands are built on two pillars. One is of consistency and the other is of authenticity. Consistency because you want the same thing over and over again, and I don't mean it in a boring way. What I mean it is in a reliable way. Reliability, I believe, is the world's best loyalty program, more than frequent flyer miles and this, that, and the other. And similarly, it is authenticity where that's the only way that you will, as time goes by, people will see that what you are saying, what you're doing is who you really are. So the way I kind of think about it is that, advertising, and I like advertising, but great advertising is like a beautiful wrapping paper. And like any marketing and advertising person will tell you, if the product or the service is not authentic, does not answer to the need of the consumer, then no amount of advertising and marketing can help you sustain success over a long period of time. It can bring people through the door because they're attracted by good advertising, but they can't keep you, and therefore brands are built even when the wrapping paper starts tearing, the box that is inside it, the content that's inside it, is something that is authentic and people see it for what it is. This is towards the external customer, but the same thing applies to internal customers also, right? And I'm a big believer in what Sabia said. All of us, every one of the leaders that I can see on the screen today, right? We have dealt with change. They have had to deal with change in a hard way, sometimes when it has been thrust upon us, sometimes where we are leading the change. But I think a lot of times what leaders feel is they don't stand up in front of their employees, in front of their colleagues and say, you know what, this is going to be hard. It's going to be hard for you. It's going to be hard for me. I can tell you why we are doing it. I'm not quite sure I've figured everything out. I'm not quite sure that this will actually lead to success. But what I know is that if we don't do it, we are going to slip off the treadmill, right? Or something that is thrust upon us. The pandemic was a great example of that. Leaders who were transparent, were authentic, but most importantly, empathetic.
Yeah.
Right, are the ones who led their teams and their businesses through this unprecedented crisis. Right? Because I've got to personalize this. I did my first show and tell competition when I was 5 years old. So I have no stage fear. I have no stage fright, right? I used to be an actor. I used to be a debater. So I have no stage fright. But having said that, right? And for me, the larger the audience, the more excited I get, right? But every year I used to do this once kind of State of the Union address to all my colleagues. And it used to be like 2.5, 3 hours, right? Just that moment I'm mic'd up, and before I'm getting up on stage, whether it was Indigo, whether it was Oyo, whether it is Akasa today, that's the only time that I would get nervous, because I knew that whatever I'm going to say for the next 2.5, 3 hours, right? If I exaggerate it by 1 inch, somebody in the audience will know. If I hide something by 1 centimeter, somebody in the audience will know. And I'm on test there. I'm on test because one guy or one girl in that audience of 20,000 will know, hey, you know what? That's not true. He's lying, right? And your reputation will go off like that, right? So that's how important authenticity is internally. And then that translates externally also. In a consumer-facing business like the airline business, hotels business, we get it wrong every once in a while. Look at the size and the complexity of the operations that we're doing, right? And we get it really badly wrong when we lie to our customers, when we hide from our customers, right? So,
Wonderful.
so I think put one of my previous bosses, Rakesh Gangwal. I remember just before Indigo had just listed, and I was prepping for my first analyst call. We had like over 700 analysts dialing in. And Rakesh just gave me one piece of advice. Aditya, put the bad news out there first, right? And I never forget that. So I think that is where that authenticity and transparency gives you the power to kind of go through crisis.
I want to thank you, Aditya. I want to pick up a question from one of the audiences, but before that, just a personal anecdote. You are an ex-McKinsey consultant, if I have understood correctly, Aditya. Right?
No. I have my sister-in-law was a McKinsey consultant. I have a lot of friends, but
Okay.
I never went to business school. I would have never got a job at McKinsey.
Right.
I would have never got a job at McKinsey.
It's interesting. I once was co-facilitating a McKinsey leadership program.
Yeah, I have done that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things that happened, there was a session where we were training very senior McKinsey leaders to be able to say, I don't know, with a smile. There was a whole session dedicated to teaching them how to say, I don't know, and smile when you say it.
Yeah.
And somehow we have all been conditioned to believe that we are going to be successful and we are going to be effective if we have the answers at the tip of our tongue. And in doing so, I think there is a tendency to either exaggerate or hide a little bit, as you point out, and to have that genuine humility to say, I don't know, this is the problem I'm grappling with, and I'm interested in gathering the wisdom of the room to come up with a solution, is probably the best signal of authenticity that we can give. Interesting
I love
comment.
that story. I really love that story, and especially with a smile, because what
Yes.
it says, it's not a bad thing if I don't know.
No.
I'm really happy that I can share this with you. So that's brilliant. I will remember that.
I often get asked this question, what is the one piece of advice you give to your younger self? And I always say, I'd say shamelessly ask for help. Shamelessly ask for help, because when we get into this hero complex where we pretend, or we need to pretend that we know everything. I got it under control. I got this. I think yeah, so it's very
interesting comment from Mohit Hira, where he says, let me just find it. He says, in an ephemeral world where consumers are like butterflies with fleeting attention spans, one powerful measurement of reputation is the consumer's willingness to recommend your brand without caveats. Only if I trust a brand unconditionally will I recommend it to anyone who asks. And so while we talk about making our consumers and making our stakeholders into our advocates and ambassadors, I think it's the without caveats piece that really struck out for me, saying that, I will have my views, but I'm willing to put myself out there in recommending a brand or a company or an organization and so on. So Mohit, thank you for that. I'd like to move to the third focus area, which is crisis, what happens in crisis. And really the question, this one's to you, Aditya. You said, and you alluded to this earlier as well, every crisis is a slow leak. And every crisis is an opportunity to build trust. So in that process, what do you see are the pros and cons of a head-on approach or a no-comment approach? And is it situational? How do you assess the potential damage? What's your take on this?
So, why we talked about authenticity, but you also mentioned trust, right? So when a new business starts, or you're a legacy business, but you're getting into a new area, you have, or your new product that you're introducing in the market, one has to remember that you start off with a trust deficit, right? Because people don't know. You may think you have the best product, you have the best intentions, but people just don't know who you are. And this will be especially relevant as companies from India start creating global businesses. You may be the big crocodile in the pool over here, but out there you're a small fish in a massive ocean. Nobody knows who you are, right? So you start off with that trust deficit. Now, therefore, you have to build with that authenticity and consistency to start creating that bridge, which is the brand that I was talking about, the brand reputation, etc. Now, when a crisis hits you, that is when your leadership skills are being tested. That is where your character as a company, as an individual, is being tested. And I love a good crisis. I love a good challenge, because that's suddenly, out of nowhere, you got an opportunity to rise above, the normal day-to-day, and then prove to people, your customers, your colleagues, your partners, to the world, that I'm not just another company or just another product or a service. I will react to this differently. Right? The way the employees at the Taj hotel in Mumbai, right, at the spur of the moment, right, reacted and responded to the crisis of the 26th of November, right? No amount of advertising, no amount of brand spend could have built the reputation of the Tatas as that one incident did.
Absolutely right.
I was checked into the Oberois. I missed getting shot by 15 minutes. I had colleagues inside the Taj. I personally called. My last call was picked up at well past midnight, and this lady told me, "I made a note of your friends. We'll try to get to that person." And that was at nearly 1 o'clock in the morning. I have personally experienced. So, and likewise, in the businesses that I've been involved in, that's the time that you can really, really rise above what the normal is, right? It's like, think about it this way. When we watch a patriotic movie and we are watching this, your country's soldiers going and saving the world, you feel like, I should be at the border, protecting and saving freedom, right? Why? And you're looking for that opportunity. Right? You want to come out alive, but you're also looking for that opportunity to show I'm something more than just being another manager. So I think that's why any one of these crises are a great opportunity. Now, why is it a leak? It's a leak because of what I just said in the beginning. You have to be able to smell the gas leaking before the house blows up, right? And you got to think about why even if before the smoke alarm goes off. Right. And I think this is where then gradually what will happen, and that's where I'll close the comment with, your colleagues, your customers will have the confidence to come up to you and say, you know what, you might be missing this because this is a blind spot, but have a look at this. I have your best interest at heart. And I love that about the kind of consumer facing large number of people type of businesses that I'm involved.
Yeah, I think at a planetary level, my own view, which might sound a little bit pessimistic, is that as humanity, we wasted the COVID crisis. That at a planetary level, we had an opportunity to rise above, exactly as you say. Some of us did, but many of us did.
Nitin Thakur is here, who's my colleague from OYO. I'll tell you about a conversation that I had with Ritesh Agarwal, my colleague who's the founder of OYO. Ritesh and I were speaking on the phone, and we would often speak for hours. This is lockdown. We have nothing to do. We can't even step out into our lift lobby. And one of the things I said to Ritesh, and he kind of, very took it to heart. I said, Ritesh, the only thing we owe to everybody is we cannot go back to the way things were, right? And because everybody was like, this thing will be over. We'll be back to normal. And I was like, we can't go back to the way things were. And OYO is a great example of a business that reinvented itself, and of course now financially very successful, and so on and so forth. Of course, work in progress, like all of us are. But I think that you're right that we could have done more. We probably need to do more. Sorry, Sabia, you were saying something.
Sabia, I want to ask you, you talked about in a crisis how you lean on values and community. That a crisis is not something that you deal with alone, even if you're in the leadership space. You draw strength and sustenance from values and community. And you made this wonderful comment, who will catch you when you fall? Can you say a little bit more about working collectively, engaging the ecosystem, and feeling safe when you're leading in a crisis?
So, I mean, the great thing working for a German company is that you learn processes extremely well because everything is a process. And I think in a crisis, practicing crisis is extremely important. And, you know, Allianz, the company I worked for, has a standing crisis committee with the head of the committee making the decisions in a crisis. By the way, it's nobody from the board. It is nobody from the board. It's a designated independent person. And we used to have these crisis drills. And sometimes we knew that the crisis would come, sometimes not, right? It was a surprise crisis to test how good this committee works and how well we work together. And depending on, you know, when the crisis came, for me, I was the representative of the communications department on that crisis team. Sometimes my deputy, sometimes we used to take turns. But then in the background, we always had 3 designated people who would help us then, you know, in whatever needed to be done. And, you know, here's the thing. In a crisis, whether you invested in your employees or not, will really become evident. It's like you did not, you know, when you're sewing something and the seams are not properly done, if there's a little pressure, it's going to rip. So what you sew in your department, in your company, and how you invest in your employees on a personal level, you will see that pays out in a crisis. And I say that because in a crisis, you need everybody thinking way above and beyond their assigned role, their assigned circles of influence. They need to be thinking for everyone else, and they need to be thinking in a way that you taught them to with the values you put first. And that only comes if you've invested properly and you have shown in your day-to-day, you know, this is what we stand for. You know, we stand for transparency. We'll go out first with whatever news we have, even if we don't know the full picture. We will go out with bad news, as you've said, Aditya, you know, lead with the bad news first, things like that. But without the community that reaches into several areas and aspects of your stakeholder groups, you will not be able to manage a crisis because you can't these days reach everybody as fast as you need to. And the best ambassadors, you mentioned the Edelman Trust Barometer. You know, who are the most authentic and believable people today? It's employees and customers. It's not the CEOs. It's not even journalists or reporters, which is very surprising. You know, they also had a huge downfall in trust. I'm sorry to say, Indrajit. You know, that's just what happened. Yes. But I think if you don't lean on the community that you have cultivated before, which includes your employees, it will be very hard to manage a crisis, especially over a sustained long period of time. If a crisis is a matter of a couple of days, you know, you can do it more or less in a particular group. But if a crisis is sustained and long, it's very hard to do it without a community surrounding you, acting on your behalf, and knowing exactly what to do. And not to do in terms of actions, but values driven.
So the seeds are sown in advance. The values are embedded in advance. And then in a way, you are relying on the health of what has been sown in advance to see you through that difficult and adverse period. And you're okay to ask for it and you're okay to expect it because of what you have sown in advance. And that is, I think, an important point that you're making. I'm just conscious of time. We have only 5 minutes left. Time has flown. So I don't think we'll have that much time to go to the next topic, which was about internal stakeholders. We have spent a little bit of time talking about it already. So I want to give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions or make some comments based upon what you have heard. And I'll pass them on to Aditya or Sabia and request you to give quick and sharp responses in the interest of time that's available. So let's have a look. Here's a question from Arun Sudhaman. How do you see outrage culture or even cancel culture affecting corporate decision-making and communication strategies? Should we expect greater corporate reticence in terms of promoting values? Any one of you who feels like taking that on? How do you see outrage culture affecting corporate decision-making?
I mean, at a generalistic level, I think, organizations and companies, they come up, we spend so much time coming up with who we are and what our values are. And if we truly believe in it, then we have to be able to stand up behind that as well. Right? Because what happens sometimes is that, some of this is so high volume, high decibel, that the high volume of it kind of begins to make you feel that you go through self-doubt, and that's all right. But as long as after that self-introspection and self-doubt, you feel that the values that you stood for are what really matter to you the most, I think you should stick to it. And with the humility that if on the other hand, you did something and it's a big mistake, and it happens, we're all human beings, and our companies are extensions of that. You raise your hand and say, I made a mistake and I'm sorry, and I'm not going to do it again. And look back and say, how can I improve? I mean, it's a very generalized statement, but I feel that's the kind of approach. Sabia, I mean, you run a more global operation, and maybe you have a different view.
I actually struggle with that because outrage is such a personal emotion. As a corporate, it's very hard to react to that because, outrage cannot be met with facts, with reasoning, right? It's an emotion. It needs to be on a personal level. So I still haven't found the formula, to be honest, to deal with outrage if it's if it's specific to a service or a product, then it's different. Then, what you said, Aditya, is absolutely valuable. If it's a general sort of outrage, which unfortunately we are seeing because people are grieved about a lot of things, they're grieved about a lot of things, and you're just one more thing, and maybe you didn't do anything particularly wrong, but just slightly wrong, and it's just the straw that breaks the camel's back. So unfortunately, I think we all, everywhere, every person needs to be a soothing, calming presence, I think, in today's age that is so outraged in general about everything. Brings us back to the beginning of the conversation, which is, our civic dialogue has gone lost, where we listen to each other, because I think that's a perfect antidote to outrage.
Just to respond to that, Sabia, another question that came up was, I know we got very little time, that we talked about planting seeds around our values in advance. The question is from Vivek Kelkar. He says that the big issue today is greenwashing. So what seems like planting seeds around values can be interpreted as greenwashing. And so how, he's asking the question, how do you manage this, especially in Europe at companies like Allianz?
I mean, I can't speak for Allianz anymore. I left there, but I will say this thing. I think that the most important thing is pick one thing as a company that you want to get right instead of 10 things.
Yeah.
And, if you take one thing and you're consistent with that, it's easier to achieve, and you can, and then you can be very, I think then you can make progress. If you do too many things and you want to be known for, 10 things that you're doing, let's say in ESG, it's going to be very difficult to not at some stage be accused of greenwashing. That's just the reality of things.
Thank you. It's exactly 7 o'clock. I'd like to draw this conversation to a close. I'm sure we could go on for at least another hour with all the questions and all the stimulation that both Sabia and Aditya have given us in this conversation. So first of all, my big thanks to both of you for being open and candid and helpful to our audience. A big thank you to Indrajit and his Founding Fuel team, Charles, Shweta, Ramnath, etc. A big thank you to the audience for joining in, for commenting, for asking questions, for being involved. And one message I want to leave behind for everybody is that if this is a topic of interest to all of you, you would like to see a further deep dive into this topic in any way, shape, or form, then please do communicate that with us. And we will see, building upon this, what else we could potentially do in the future. So with that, this is Vijay signing off and signing out, handing over to IG if you just want to say a few closing words, IG.
No, you've put it so well, Vijay. It was a fantastic conversation. We couldn't have asked for anything better. Thank you, Aditya, Sabia, and very insightful, thoughtful, and everything that we could have hoped for possibly. And Vijay for brilliantly steering it as always.
Indrajit, thank you for having us. And Vijay, really, the audience does not know the amount of effort you put in for a couple of weeks before this conversation. So that really helped. And Charles and everybody. And I don't think I've ever seen such an active chat box. so thank you. It was very cool to see all the comments and questions and everything. It felt like, it really felt like we were in a drawing room discussing. So that's really cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This is terrific. And I don't want to hold you up on a Friday evening. So we kind of bid you all goodbye. We'll try and ship the recording within the next half an hour, maybe an hour, so that everyone gets a chance to listen to it again, because there is a lot of value nestled here. You may want to share it with your network as well. And the summary that usually follows, which my colleague Shweta Basrao does so, it's a handcrafted summary, not AI-driven. That will reach you as well soon. That we can promise you for sure. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.